Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, checked your bank account, and realized that your money was gone, and the person you trust the most is the one who took it? I had just survived cancer, thinking I could finally breathe. But all it took was $500, and everything I'd built over the past year came crashing down. I didn't know what to do next. I'm 21 years old. A year ago, I got diagnosed with cancer, and everything changed in an instant. You think you know life, that there's a rhythm, a predictable pattern. Wake up, go to school, hang out with friends, sleep, and then it all disappears like sand slipping through your fingers. The doctor's words didn't just shatter that rhythm. They made every breath, every heartbeat, a negotiation with survival itself. I remember sitting in that sterile room, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, and feeling my chest tighten as if gravity itself had doubled its weight. I couldn't even speak. My hands were shaking, and I had to grip the armrests of the chair so tightly I thought my knuckles might crack. Cancer, the word echoed in my mind over and over, each repetition heavier than the last. Would I live to see another day? Would I make it through the semester? Would I even have a chance to feel normal again? Now, after months of chemotherapy, radiation, and medications that blurred the lines between reality and haze, I'm in remission. I survived. I'm alive. The sunlight spills through my window in the mornings, and I feel its warmth on my skin like a quiet promise that life continues. But surviving doesn't mean life is simple. Nothing is ever simple after you've stared mortality in the face. I moved back in with my parents, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Money was tight, and I didn't have enough savings to return to my old university. Community college was the only feasible option for continuing my education while keeping afloat financially. Tuition, living expenses, bills that never seemed to end it, was overwhelming. Moving home was practical, safe, it made sense. But practical never feels easy. Days blurred into routines. Wake up early. Eat a modest breakfast. Try not to worry my parents. Attend classes. Complete assignments. Cook simple meals. Do laundry. Try to keep my body from deteriorating again. Sleep and repeat. The simplicity of routine was a bomb, but it was also a cage. Every small task carried a hidden weight. The knowledge that if I slipped, if I fell behind, the consequences wouldn't just be failing a class, they would be compounded by the fragility of my health and the precarity of my finances. I share a bank account with my mum. Always have. She insisted from the time I was a child, I need to know where your money is, just in case of an emergency. I agreed. I never objected. Back then, it felt normal, safe, necessary. I never imagined it could become a source of tension, or worse, betrayal. This month, finally, I received my tuition refund from my previous university. For weeks, I had waited, checked my account obsessively, counted the days in my head, imagining what I could do once the money arrived. Relief hit me like a wave. Finally, I could chip away at my student loans. Finally, I could feel like I was reclaiming some control over my life. I felt a cautious sense of triumph, a tiny victory in a year that had been nothing but survival, and then it happened. 2 days later, I checked my account to plan how much I could pay toward my loans, and I froze. $500 gone, transferred into my mother's account. At first, I thought I was mistaken. I stared at the screen for minutes, scrolling through transactions, double-checking the numbers, recounting sums in my head like a desperate calculator. No, it was there. The money was mine. The refund clearly marked as a community college refund. Not a gift, not a loan, not some mistake I had made. It was mine, and it had vanished. Shock, disbelief, and an unsettling anger coiled inside me all at once. How could she, my mother, take my money without telling me? Without asking, without explaining? I had never felt this level of violation before. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she thought it was an overpayment. Maybe she thought it was extra refund from another class I had taken at my old university. Maybe she thought she was helping. But none of those explanations eased the knot tightening in my chest. None of them softened the feeling that something I thought I controlled, something I had worked toward, had been stripped away in silence. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. The darkness seemed thicker than usual, the shadows deeper. Every memory of the past year, the IVS, the nausea, the hair loss, the nights of crying silently alone flashed through my mind. I had fought so hard to survive, to reclaim normalcy, and now, after everything, I felt powerless in a way that was almost unbearable. I kept running through possibilities. Had I misunderstood a conversation? Had she mentioned something I didn't remember? Did I miss a clue that she might see the money differently than I did? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't about $500. It was about control, about trust, about the fragile line between independence and reliance. And I was angry, more angry than I'd been in a long time, maybe ever. I could feel the pulse in my veins, a relentless thrum that seemed to echo in my skull. My hands were clammy, my stomach churned, and my chest felt tight as if the room itself had contracted. I wanted to scream, to wake someone up, to demand answers, but I didn't, not yet. I just lay there, in the dim glow of my laptop, staring at the account screen I had opened countless times, knowing the money had been there, knowing now it was gone, knowing I had no idea how it had disappeared. This was supposed to be a time of relief, of moving forward, of reclaiming life after a year of sickness and fear. And instead, I felt like a child again, powerless, trapped in a reality where the people I trusted most could act without notice. And I would have to watch and wait, helpless. And somewhere deep inside, I realized that this was just the beginning. The sense of betrayal, the questioning of trust, the gnawing need to regain control, these feelings weren't going anywhere. They were growing, feeding on my sleepless nights, on my quiet reflections, on every small memory and routine that had once made me feel safe. I had survived cancer, yes, but now I had to survive this toother quiet war between independence and dependence, between trust and the reality of human imperfection. And unlike cancer, there was no doctor's office, no treatment plan, no clear path to recovery. Asterisk. I can't stop thinking about the past, about how all of this began not with the $500 disappearing, not with the refund showing up in my bank account, but decades ago. When I was a child and my mother first introduced the concept of shared responsibility over money, I remember sitting across from her at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the blinds, casting stripes over the worn linoleum floor. She was patient, yet firm. "I need to know where your money is, just in case of an emergency," she said. I didn't question it, not then. I was 8, maybe 9, and the world was already a place full of rules I didn't understand. Money was confusing, mysterious, and her explanation made it simple, safe, necessary. I trusted her implicitly, as children do. I handed over my little allowance, my first birthday money, the coins I had collected in jars, and she stored it, keeping track in a meticulous notebook she always had on hand. Every entry was precise, every calculation doubled. I felt proud of the system. It was a collaboration, a partnership. My money was safe, and I was safe, because she was in control. Over the years, I learned the rhythm of it. Whenever I wanted something, a toy, a small treat, a book, I would ask. She would check the notebook, the balances, the calculations, and either approve or explain why not. It was never arbitrary. Every decision was framed as guidance, care, protection, and I believed it. Every time as I grew older, I began to understand more about the complexities of money, about bills, loans, tuition, and the real pressures of adulthood. And yet, even in adolescence, I never doubted the arrangement. Sure, sometimes I was frustrated when I couldn't buy something immediately, but the trust remained. The system worked. My mother was the guardian, the protector, the one who made sure I didn't falter, financially or otherwise. Now, lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling in the dim light of my room, I see the contrast so starkly. The safety I once felt as a child feels almost absurdly fragile in retrospect. The very trust that gave me comfort now feels like a chain. $500, just a number, really, almost meaningless in the grand scheme, but it represents something far larger. Independence, autonomy, a claim over the part of my life I thought was mine, and now it's gone, taken silently, without consultation. I flash back to other moments I never thought mattered. The time I tried to buy a new video game in middle school, and she made me calculate how long it would take to save up, teaching me patience and budgeting. The first summer job I had, where she insisted I deposit every paycheck into our joint account so we could track expenses. The first credit card she could sign with me in high school, for emergencies only, and the long lectures about responsibility that followed. Each memory is tinged with love, yes, but also control. Protection or possession? It's hard to tell now. I remember lying in bed, late at night, after a particularly heated argument in high school over some minor purchase I thought was mine to make. I cried silently, frustrated, angry, yet deep down, I never doubted her intentions. She was my mother. She was always right, always looking out for me, always keeping me from harm, even if it meant I felt trapped, even if it meant I didn't fully understand the rules she imposed. And yet here I am, 21, staring at my account balance, replaying all of those moments in my mind. The same sense of powerlessness, the same knot in my chest, the same tiny, desperate feeling that I am both a child and an adult at once. The rules haven't changed. The trust hasn't disappeared entirely, but it's been tested. And for the first time, I feel that perhaps I was wrong to assume safety. Perhaps independence was never meant to be mine entirely, even now. I try to reconcile the anger with the love, to remind myself that this is still the woman who nursed me through my cancer treatment, who sat beside me during chemo sessions, who held my hand when I thought I couldn't survive. She has saved me countless times in ways I will never fully comprehend. And yet, $500, just $500, feels like a betrayal. The line between care and control has blurred so completely that I can't see where one ends and the other begins. The irony isn't lost on me. I spent a year fighting for my life, thinking that surviving cancer would make me stronger, more resilient, more independent. I thought I'd emerge from hospitals and clinics with a renewed sense of agency. And yet, this tiny act of taking money, the silence, the lack of explanations strikes deeper than any 4-line or chemotherapy session ever did. It's not physical. It's psychological, emotional. It gnaws at the edges of my mind in a way that nothing else has. I think about trust, and I think about control. I think about all the small ways my mother has intervened over the years. Some of them were necessary. Some of them were kind. Some of them were protective. And now, in this moment, I can't tell the difference anymore. And that's terrifying. It makes me wonder, was I ever truly in control of my own life? Or have I always been playing by her rules, and this is the moment the facade crumbled? I stare at the ceiling and imagine conversations I should have had. The words that would explain, clarify, assert my ownership. But my voice feels small in the dark. The weight of a year of illness, of reliance, of survival, of the shared history with my mother, presses down on me. It's suffocating. I can't just reach across the kitchen table and demand my money back without also demanding answers to questions I've carried for years. Questions I wasn't even aware I had until this moment. And as I sit there, in the dim glow of my laptop and the quiet hum of the house, I realize the truth. This isn't just about $500. It's about every decision I've ever made under her watchful eye, every moment of trust and every shadow of doubt. It's about understanding what it means to be independent while still being loved, to navigate the thin line between reliance and autonomy, to reconcile the child I was with, the adult I am now. Memories continue to flood in. I think of times when I was sick as a child, when she stayed up all night to make sure I had water, medicine, warmth. Times when she fought with insurance companies, hospitals, and schools on my behalf. Times when I felt powerless, and she was my anchor. And now, that same anchor has shifted, and the security I felt seems unstable. The same hands that comforted me, that held me, now hold a claim over something I consider mine. And the deeper I think, the more I realize that this is the first real test of my independence. The first fracture in the wall between me and the world I've been trying to reclaim. I lie back and stare at the ceiling, feeling the weight of every past decision, every past lesson, every past argument. All the little ways my mother shaped me, controlled me, guided me, they converge here, in the silent aftermath of a single financial decision. And somewhere in the shadows, I understand, surviving cancer taught me that life is fragile, fleeting, unpredictable. But surviving this, surviving the slow, invisible erosion of trust, autonomy, and independence might be even harder. The next morning felt heavier than usual. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, but instead of warmth, it carried a harsh reminder of reality. I went through my routine mechanically. Breakfast, class, homework, chores. Everything felt the same. Yet the weight of the missing $500 lingered like an invisible chain around my chest. Every interaction, every casual conversation with my parents carried a subtle tension I hadn't noticed before. I smiled at my mom during breakfast, but the smile felt hollow, rehearsed. She smiled back, oblivious, or maybe she thought I was just tired. I couldn't tell. My thoughts kept returning to the account statement, the clear words indicating that the money was mine, and the inexplicable transfer into her account. I tried to focus on classes, but even simple tasks felt loaded. Reading assignments blurred into each other, my pen moving across the notebook without real thought. Calculations for a budget exercise felt mocking. I could almost hear the echo of my mother's voice from childhood, teaching me to manage money, teaching me patience, teaching me discipline, and now, all of it felt like an ironic prelude to this moment. After class, I walked to the grocery store, checking my phone obsessively for any notification, any sign that the transfer might reverse itself, any clue that the money would return without confrontation. But there was nothing. Every purchase I made, carton of milk, some fruit, a loaf of bread, felt like a reminder of the $500 I had lost. The small purchases became symbolic, each swipe of the card a reminder of what should have been mine. Back home, I tried to distract myself with chores, cooking, cleaning, even rearranging my room. But every noise in the house, the creak of the floorboards, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the occasional laughter from the living room felt amplified, charged with tension. I couldn't escape the gnawing anxiety that had settled in my stomach. It was a pressure I couldn't shake, a constant hum of unrest that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. I attempted to rationalize again. Maybe she thought the money was hers to redirect. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. I kept replaying the words of past conversations in my head, searching for a hint, a clue, a justification I could accept. Nothing satisfied me. Every thought ended in the same knot of frustration and helplessness. By evening, I realized that the anger was more than just about money. It was about autonomy, about the control I thought I had over my life, about the fragility of trust. Every interaction with my mum from this point forward seemed to carry a hidden weight, a subtle test of my patience, and I knew, deep down, that I couldn't let this slide. I had to assert myself. I had to reclaim what was mine, not just the $500, but the sense of independence that came with it. And yet, every time I imagined confronting her, I felt a pang of guilt. She had nursed me through my illness, sat by me during long nights of chemotherapy, argued with insurance companies on my behalf. Could I really yell, demand, or accuse? Could I risk the relationship I had so carefully balanced with my own survival and recovery? As night fell, I sat alone in my room, the glow of the desk lamp casting shadows across the walls. I made mental lists, what I would say, how I would approach it, what I would demand, and what I could compromise on. Every scenario ended in frustration. Every thought a reminder of the tension between care and control, love and autonomy, dependence and independence. The night stretched endlessly. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. My body was exhausted from the day, from the routines, from the constant mental calculations, and yet my mind refused to rest. Thoughts of my mother, the account, the missing money, and everything it symbolized raced in loops. I realized then that this was no longer just about money. It was about reclaiming a piece of myself that had been quietly, imperceptibly eroded over the years. By the early hours of the next morning, sleep became impossible. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, tracing patterns in the cracks of plaster, listening to the distant hum of the city outside. Every memory, every flashback from my childhood, every lesson, every time my mother had intervened, came flooding back. They converged into a single, unrelenting thought. How do I reclaim what is mine without losing her completely? The anger had grown sharper, more precise. It wasn't just frustration anymore, it was a burning clarity. $500 had become a symbol of every compromise, every restriction, every lesson in obedience disguised as guidance. It was a test I hadn't signed up for, yet one I couldn't ignore. I thought about confronting her, not violently, not irrationally, but with the firmness and authority that adulthood demanded. I rehearsed the words, "Mum, you cannot take my money without telling me. That money is mine. I earned it, I planned for it, and you cannot decide on your own to move it." But rehearsing didn't ease the storm inside. It made it sharper. Each line I repeated in my head carried the weight of years of built-up tension and suppressed frustration. I thought of my independence, of my recovery from cancer, of the countless nights I had stayed awake in hospital beds, fighting for my life, when every moment could have been my last. I had survived something unimaginably hard, and now, in what should have been the simplest assertion of autonomy money in my own account, I was being tested again. I tried to empathize. Maybe she thought she was helping. Maybe she had her reasons. But the quiet, insidious realization settled in. Intentions didn't matter here. Actions mattered. And she had taken something from me, unilaterally, without discussion, without acknowledgement. The house was silent. My parents slept, unaware of the storm raging in the small room upstairs. And in that silence, I realized the truth. The world didn't always protect you, not even the people you loved the most. Trust had to be asserted, independence had to be claimed, and courage had to be found even if it meant confrontation, even if it meant conflict, even if it meant breaking the fragile peace. I thought about how to approach her, how to stand firm without losing my mind. I imagined waking her up, demanding answers, insisting on restitution. I imagined the conversation, every possible response, every possible counter-argument. I felt my pulse quicken, my hands clench, the restless energy coiling tighter and tighter, and in that moment, lying in the dim glow of the lamp, staring at the walls that had witnessed my childhood, my sickness, my survival, I understood something essential. Surviving cancer had been a battle of the body. This battle of trust, autonomy, and respect was a battle of the mind, the heart, and the soul. And unlike chemotherapy or surgery, there was no guaranteed recovery. I had to navigate this carefully, strategically, and bravely. I thought of every small act of defiance I had ever taken. Every time I had asserted myself as a teenager, every lesson learned in patience and resilience. They were not just memories, they were tools, weapons, and shields. I realized then that I was ready to confront, ready to demand, ready to reclaim what was mine. Not just the money, but the independence and dignity that had been quietly eroded over time. The early dawn crept through the blinds, pale and cold, illuminating the room. I felt the tension peak, the anger sharpen, the courage gather, and somewhere in the quiet, I made a decision. I would not wait any longer. I would wake her, I would demand explanation, and I would not stop until the money was returned, and until the trust and clarity that had been shaken were addressed, because surviving life-threatening illness had taught me many things. But surviving this test of patience, authority, and self-respect would define the next chapter of my life, and I was ready to fight. I awoke that morning with a lingering tension in my chest, a residue from the sleepless hours spent rehearsing confrontations in the dark. The sunlight through the blinds seemed sharper than usual, cutting across the walls and floor like it was highlighting every imperfection, every fault line in my life. I reached for my phone, the familiar weight in my hand, and checked the bank account one more time. $500, gone, transferred, no explanation, no note, no warning. The shock hit me like a physical blow. I could feel it in my stomach, twisting in my hands, trembling slightly as I scrolled through the transactions. My mind raced, desperate for some logical explanation. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the bank made a mistake. But deep down, I knew. I knew exactly what had happened. I remembered the shared account, the countless childhood lessons about money, and the implicit trust I had placed in my mother for years. And now, that trust had been violated. It wasn't just money. It was autonomy, independence, control. Something I had fought so hard to reclaim after surviving cancer, after returning home, after trying to rebuild a life of my own. I felt the anger start to bubble up, hot and consuming, threatening to spill over. But I tried to hold it in, to temper it with reason. I rehearsed phrases in my head. Mom, I need an explanation. This money is mine. You can't take it without telling me. Each repetition sharpened the frustration. Each imagined conversation a new flare of tension. I replayed recent conversations in my head. Had she said something? A hint, a clue that I ignored? No, nothing. She had taken the money silently, assuming her right to decide, assuming her authority outweighed my independence. I could almost hear her voice from my childhood, instructing, correcting, guiding, and now the same voice seemed to mock me with its absence. As the morning progressed, I felt a strange combination of fear and fury. Fear of confrontation, fear of escalation, fear of hurting the relationship with the one person who had been my constant anchor through sickness and recovery. But fury, Tora, unfiltered, undeniable fury. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. This was an affront, a silent statement that I had no agency over a part of my life that should have been unquestionably mine. I couldn't hold it in any longer. By midday, the tension had reached a breaking point. I found her in the kitchen, humming softly while she prepared lunch, the sunlight catching in her hair, making it glow like it always had when I was a child. I felt the familiar knot tighten in my chest. I swallowed hard and took a deep breath. Mum, I said, my voice shaking, betraying more emotion than I wanted to show. She looked up, eyebrows raised, expecting something mundane, a question about chores, maybe a reminder about class. She didn't expect this. I need to talk to you about the bank account, I said. I tried to keep it calm, but the words were heavy, loaded. She nodded slowly, still smiling faintly, waiting for me to continue. The $500 that was in my account, I said, each word deliberate, measured, was transferred into yours. I don't understand why. She froze for a moment, the faint smile flickering, and then she laughed softly, not cruelly, but almost dismissively. Oh, that, she said. I thought it was just some extra refund from your old classes. I didn't think it would be an issue. My stomach dropped. That's it. That's your explanation. My anger flared instantly. Mum, that's not the point. That money was mine. You can't just take it without telling me, without asking. Her expression hardened slightly, a familiar defense mechanism I remembered from my teenage years. I told your father, she said. I thought you'd notice it, that you'd see it as a correction for the other class. It was supposed to make things fair. Fair, my mind screamed. Fair, you call taking my money fair? I could feel my voice rising, my emotions threatening to overtake reason. You don't get to decide what's fair for me. You can't just assume that. She looked at me with a mixture of exasperation and what I could only describe as pity. It's only money, you know, she said. You're being dramatic. You should have asked politely instead of yelling. The words hit like a punch, Only money. Only money. I thought about every sleepless night, every worry about tuition, every plan I had made to pay off loans, every step I had taken to regain control over my life. Only money. It felt like a betrayal far deeper than that. It was about trust, about respect, about independence. And I realized then that yelling might be the only language she would understand. I felt a heat rising from my chest to my face, my hands trembling slightly, my breath short. I had to assert myself. I wasn't a child anymore. I had survived cancer. I had faced life and death, and now I had to face this. I raised my voice deliberately to match the magnitude of my emotions. Mum, listen to me. You cannot take my money without explaining it to me. I worked hard for that refund. I planned to use it for my student loans. I need it, and you took it without asking. Her eyes narrowed. You woke me up in the middle of the night over $5, she said, her voice rising in frustration. And now you're yelling at me about a few hundred? You should have just asked nicely. I felt my chest tighten. My mind raced. How can she not see this? How can she dismiss it so easily? The words I wanted to say piled up, each one sharper than the last. It's not just a few $100s. It's the principle. You don't get to take what's mine, and you don't get to hide behind excuses. The house seemed to shrink around us. Every creak of the floorboard, every distant sound from outside, felt amplified, charged with tension. I could feel my parents' presence, the history, the childhood lessons, the countless moments where I had learned obedience and patience, and now I was throwing all of that into the air, challenging the very foundation of our relationship. She crossed her arms, defensive, unyielding. You're being disrespectful. You woke me up, you yelled, and now you're acting as if the world revolves around you. It's just money. I could barely contain the torrent of emotions swirling inside. I remembered the surgeries, the treatments, the nights spent alone in hospitals, fighting for my life, and I realized that surviving that had given me the courage to survive this too. My voice shook with intensity, but I forced every word out. Mum, surviving cancer taught me how fragile life is. But surviving this, surviving the erosion of trust and independence, you think it's easier. You think dismissing it as just money solves anything. No, I will not let this slide. I am reclaiming what is mine, and I will not stop until you put it back. Her face flushed, a mix of frustration, exasperation, and something softer perhaps, concern or disbelief. The tension between us felt like an electric current, every word sparking, every gesture loaded with meaning. And yet I couldn't back down. I had fought too hard for my autonomy to let it be stolen silently. Finally, after what felt like hours, though in reality it was perhaps 20 minutes, she sighed. There was a pause, a moment where the tension hung thick in the air, suspended between us like a fragile glass ornament threatening to shatter. Fine, she said, almost reluctantly. I'll transfer it back. Relief hit me instantly, sharp and overwhelming, but it was tempered by exhaustion, both physical and emotional. My hands trembled, my chest still tight, but the first glimmer of resolution had arrived. The money would return, but the lessons lingered, heavier than any currency, as she completed the transfer. I watched the numbers shift on the screen, the digits moving back into my account, a tangible restoration of what was rightfully mine. But I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about the refund. It was about boundaries, about communication, about asserting oneself even when the stakes felt impossibly high. The anger ebbed slowly, replaced by a reflective quiet. I thought about the past, the childhood lessons, the shared account, the trust that had been both protective and suffocating. I thought about the present, about surviving cancer, about the fragile reclaiming of autonomy, and about the future, about the ongoing negotiation of independence and love within a family. I lay back in my chair, exhausted but resolute. The money was back, yes, but more importantly, I had faced the confrontation I had rehearsed for hours in the dark. I had asserted myself. I had demanded respect, and I had received it not perfectly, not without friction, but enough to remind me that autonomy, like life, requires vigilance, courage, and persistence. And in that quiet, with the sunlight fading into evening, I understood the subtle truth. Life after survival is not just about being alive. It's about learning to navigate the spaces between dependence and independence, love and authority, trust and control. And surviving these small but intense battles would shape the person I was becoming, one confrontation at a time. The day after the confrontation, the house felt different. It wasn't the walls, the furniture, or even the sunlight. It was the weight of what had transpired. I moved through the rooms quietly, observing my mother, her movements deliberate but restrained. There was a distance in her eyes, a subtle caution I hadn't noticed before, and in me a lingering anger, a mix of relief and exhaustion, kept my chest taut. Even with the money back in my account, something intangible had shifted. Trust, once implicit, now required constant reaffirmation. Every glance, every tone, every choice seemed magnified. I found myself over-analyzing interactions. Her smile, her gestures, the way she asked me to help with chores. Were they gestures of care or subtle assertions of control? I couldn't tell. I tried to focus on my studies, to immerse myself in classes, assignments, and routines. Yet, each time I opened my laptop, I felt the echo of the previous night, the confrontation, the raised voices, the tension crackling in the air like static electricity. My thoughts refused to settle. Every notification, every transaction, every small movement in the shared spaces of the house reminded me that the delicate balance of autonomy and dependence had been disrupted. It was then that I realized the complexity of living with a parent after a year of illness. Surviving cancer had already blurred the lines between childhood and adulthood, dependence and independence. Now, this confrontation had redrawn those lines with even sharper edges. The house, once a sanctuary, felt like a testing ground for boundaries. Each step I took, each decision I made, was a negotiation between asserting myself and maintaining peace. I could feel the subtle psychological residue of the fight lingering in my body. My muscles were tense, my thoughts racing, my emotions oscillating between irritation, fear, and guilt. I questioned myself constantly. Had I overreacted? Was I too harsh? Could I have handled it differently? And yet, deep down, I knew that asserting my boundaries was necessary, not just for this incident, but for my long-term emotional survival. Over the next several days, I found myself thinking back not just to childhood lessons about money, but to the broader dynamics of our family. My parents had always operated on a system of careful control, balancing love and authority in ways that were sometimes protective, sometimes suffocating. I had grown up internalizing both the comfort and the constraints of that system. Now, As an adult navigating the aftermath of a life-threatening illness, I realized that the same system could no longer function the way it once did. I needed autonomy. I needed clarity. I needed to feel that the choices I made, the money I earned, the plans I enacted were mine. The $500 incident had exposed the fault lines in our relationship, lines that had always existed but were now impossible to ignore. I thought about my mother, her intentions, and her history of care. She had nursed me through illness, advocated for me in countless situations, and shaped much of the person I had become. And yet, love and control were not synonymous. I had learned that even well-intentioned actions could cross boundaries, even within families. This reflection brought both sorrow and clarity. Sorrow, because the innocence of unquestioned trust was gone. Clarity, because now I understood that emotional growth often came through confrontation, through testing boundaries, through asserting oneself even when it risked conflict. The incident with the money had been a catalyst, an unavoidable test of my independence, a moment that forced me to examine and redefine the balance between love and personal agency. I realized that moving forward, I could no longer assume trust without communication. I could no longer accept unilateral decisions about my life, even from someone who had always been my protector. The path ahead would require dialogue, firmness, patience, and courage, the same tools I had relied upon in surviving illness, now applied to surviving the complexities of family life. In the weeks following the confrontation, I began taking concrete steps toward independence. I set up a separate bank account, one that my mother could not access. I reviewed my finances meticulously, planning budgets, paying bills, and mapping out tuition payments with precision. The process was tedious, sometimes stressful, but it was also empowering. Each transaction, each calculation, each small act of financial autonomy felt like reclaiming a part of myself. It wasn't just money, it was agency, responsibility, and control. For the first time in years, I felt a measure of security, not because someone else protected me, but because I was capable of protecting myself. At the same time, I worked on communication with my mother. I practiced phrasing my boundaries clearly and respectfully, anticipating her possible reactions, and preparing responses that would assert my independence without severing the bond we shared. It was delicate work. Emotional growth rarely came without effort, compromise, and reflection. I also reflected on the lessons of illness and recovery. Surviving cancer had taught me resilience, patience, and the importance of self-advocacy. Now, these lessons were being applied to family life, to the subtler but equally critical battle for emotional sovereignty. Each challenge, each conversation, each small assertion of control became a rehearsal for living fully, freely, and independently within the context of family obligations and love. Through this process, I began to see my mother differently, not just as a guardian or authority figure, but as a complex individual with her own fears, priorities, and perspectives. I acknowledged her efforts, her care, and her intentions, while maintaining my own boundaries. The balance was fragile, but it was real. Months passed, and slowly, the emotional landscape of our household shifted. The tension, while still present at times, became more manageable. I had established boundaries, asserted my independence, and learned to navigate disagreements without letting them spiral into crises. I reflected on the journey from surviving a life-threatening illness to navigating the complexities of shared finances, to confronting my mother and reclaiming agency over my life. Each challenge had forced me to grow, to develop resilience, to articulate my needs, and to understand the nuanced dynamics of love and control. I realized that emotional growth wasn't about avoiding conflict or ensuring that life always went smoothly. It was about learning to face challenges, to assert oneself respectfully, to hold space for both independence and connection. The $500 incident, which at first seemed trivial, had become a turning point, catalyst for growth, reflection, and deeper understanding. By the time evening fell, I could sit quietly, knowing that I had navigated the conflict with clarity and courage. My mother and I had not resolved every tension perfectly, but we had reached a place of mutual understanding and respect. I had reclaimed my autonomy, and she had recognized my right to it. And as I lay in bed that night, reflecting on the past year, from illness to recovery to confrontation to growth, I understood something profound. Life was not about avoiding storms, but learning to stand tall within them, to reclaim what is yours, and to navigate relationships with honesty, courage, and integrity. Months after the confrontation, the echo of that night still lingered in subtle ways. The house had returned to its normal rhythm, the hum of appliances, the distant sounds of neighbors, the familiar creak of floorboards, but the invisible lines of tension had shifted. I realized that healing, like autonomy, required time, reflection, and patience. I spent long hours reflecting on the past, my childhood, my illness, the countless lessons about money and responsibility, the months spent in hospitals, and the quiet but persistent ways my mother had shaped me. Each memory was a thread, and I began weaving them together to form a clearer picture of who I had become and who I wanted to be. It was not easy. Some memories carried pain, frustration, or resentment. Others were suffused with love, protection, and care. The trick was learning to differentiate between the two, not to assign blame blindly, but to understand intent versus impact. My mother had always acted from a place of care, yet some actions had undermined my independence. Recognizing this without anger was the first step toward reconciliation. In quiet moments, I revisited the financial incident. I pictured the numbers, the transfer, the confrontation, and the resolution. The anger, while still present, had softened into understanding. I could see the situation from her perspective, her desire to manage, to ensure fairness, to protect hand from mine, the need for autonomy, respect, and clear communication. Slowly, the narrative shifted from she violated me to we both made assumptions, and we need new rules. With this reflection, I knew it was time to speak, not just about the money, but about the deeper dynamics of our relationship. I approached my mother in the living room one evening, the golden glow of the sunset spilling across the walls. "Mum," I began carefully, "I want to talk about what happened a few months ago. Not to rehash it, but to understand each other better." She looked up, slightly wary, but nodded. The room felt charged with both tension and possibility. I took a deep breath and continued, explaining my feelings, my perspective, and the importance of boundaries and autonomy in my life. I spoke calmly but firmly, rehearsing words I had spent weeks refining in my head. She listened, silently at first, then asked questions, seeking clarification, sometimes defensive, sometimes curious. I noticed her tone soften as the conversation progressed. She shared her thoughts and fears, her desire to protect, her concern for my well-being, and her frustration at feeling excluded from decisions. The dialogue was delicate, a careful dance of words and emotions. There were moments of tension, pauses filled with uncertainty, but slowly, understanding began to emerge. It wasn't instant resolution, but the foundation for a new way of relating, one that respected both care and independence. After weeks of discussion, we began establishing new boundaries. Financial independence was the first step. I had full control of my accounts, and any shared resources were clearly defined. But it wasn't just about money. Emotional boundaries, decision-making, and communication became equally important. We created rituals of transparency, regular check-ins, honest conversations about expectations, and clear agreements on shared responsibilities. These weren't just rules, they were tools to rebuild trust, assert autonomy, and maintain connection. I noticed subtle shifts in our relationship. Arguments became less about control and more about understanding. We both practiced patience, empathy, and active listening. I could assert my needs without fear of disrespecting her care, and she could express concern without infringing on my independence. This process wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments of tension, and reminders of old habits. But each challenge became an opportunity to practice the lessons learned: communication, respect, empathy, and courage. Over time, these boundaries solidified, not as walls, but as bridges that allowed us to coexist more peacefully while honoring each other's autonomy. Months turned into a year, and the household transformed. The residual tension from the $500 incident faded, replaced by a quieter, more confident rhythm. I moved through life with a sense of agency, making decisions about my finances, education, and daily routines without fear or hesitation. My mother and I developed a new understanding, one built not on control, but on mutual respect. The bond, while different from the unquestioned closeness of childhood, was stronger in a way that mattered. It was honest, flexible, and resilient. Reflecting on the journey, I realized that the confrontation had been a turning point, not just in finances, but in emotional growth. I had survived illness, asserted independence, navigated conflict, and rebuilt trust. I had learned that love does not require surrendering autonomy, and care does not justify control. As I lay in bed one evening, looking back on the year, I understood something profound. Growth is often painful. Confrontation is sometimes necessary, and autonomy is a gift you must claim for yourself. The $500 incident, which had once seemed trivial, had catalyzed a process of reflection, courage, and reconciliation that would shape the way I navigated family, relationships, and life moving forward. I closed my eyes, finally at peace with the past, confident in my boundaries, and ready for the challenges and joys of the future. I had survived storms before, and now I was prepared to stand tall in all that life had yet to throw my way.